series of the eGrow Foundation. As an introduction, I must say that Foundation for Economic Growth is a policy-oriented think tank which believes in research-based policy advice to all the concerned stakeholders. It is in this context that we invite the very best minds from the country and beyond to come and speak to us on contemporary issues. As you know, Digital India is now the new buzzword. We have done series of webinars on telemedicine, teleeducation, where professors from IIM Bangalore have come and spoken to us. It is in that very context that we are taking the series forward. To chair the session today, we have our chairman of eGrow Foundation, Dr. Arvind Virmani. As you know, Dr. Arvind Virmani has been the chief economic advisor of our country, as well as he's the former executive director at International Monetary Fund, Washington, D.C. He has published extensively. He has spent many years in public life. He was earlier with the Planning Commission and then also an important think tank. He was heading ICRIAR. He has published work in refereed journals. He has books to his credit, and therefore he has been guiding the foundation in high quality research and policy advice. With this, I hand over the session to Dr. Arvind Virmani to conduct the proceedings.
Thank you, Charan. So let me welcome Mr. Sanjay Anandram, who is our speaker today. He has over 30 years of experience in India and overseas as an entrepreneur, inventor, executive, board member, teacher, and mentor. Currently, he is a volunteer global ambassador for Spirit, a not-for-profit technology think tank, and executive board member of MOSIP, an open source ID platform for countries. He is also the co-founder of Nice.org, in Section 8 company that works to enable brand India by creating an ecosystem for Indian cultural entrepreneurship. Given his wide experience in the private sector, we are very happy to have him speak to us on India's soft power. Mr. Anandram.
Thank you, Dr. Virmani. Thank you, Professor Charan, for the kind invitation and for the opportunity to speak to your audience this evening. First, before I start, a disclaimer: I'm not an expert on foreign policy, neither am I an academic. So that's my disclaimer. I also want to reassure everybody that the visual they see on the flyer is indeed of mine, because over the past few days, I've done some deforestation to my face. And so I'm now clean shaven, as opposed to the one that was there on the flyer, right? So this is the disclaimer and the reassurance to everybody that I'm indeed the same person. Okay, so moving on. So the session for today is about India's soft power, digital platforms and cultural entrepreneurships. And this is a view that I would like to share with you and invite you all to think about this from a brand new lens, the lens of the 21st century, which is all about the knowledge business and about Industry 4.0, Society 5.0, et cetera, et cetera. So my talk will be essentially for about 35, 40 minutes, and thereafter we will have a discussion, a conversation, and a Q&A. So that's the format for today. Thank you all once again. So moving on, so let's move to the next slide, Vivek. So we've all talked about and heard about soft power, thanks to Professor Joseph Nye, who sort of formally articulated the idea of what soft power is. When a country gets other countries to want what it wants, that could be called country's attractiveness from three resources: its culture, its political values, and foreign policies. But soft power doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists on a foundation of strong economic power as well. So a country needs to be economically powerful for it to be able to, A, have the necessary wherewithal for soft power, and two, the ability to project it successfully all around, such that it be to others who are following the country. Another interesting point, which is important for us to know and to internalize, is that soft power is not the job of just government. It involves civil society, that is the private sector and various other groups, to participate in a dance with the government, to be able to ensure that the soft power that's produced from within a country is adequately projected outside. And clearly, as again, Professor Joseph Nye has also recognized, and that's not news to us, is that India's soft power comes in large part from its ancient culture, but also its modern culture. And from his standpoint of view, the only thing he might have heard of is Bollywood and the democratic political culture. But we will see that there's a lot more to it than just that. Next slide, please. Next slide, Vivek. So India's traditional soft power sources, right? We've talked about health, wellness, yoga, Ayurveda, and stuff like that. There is Gandhiji, and Ahimsa has been, very widely recognized around the world, with many leaders proclaiming their fascination with this kind of philosophy. Indian arts and crafts, Bollywood, as again Professor Nye has also talked about, is a big source. Indian cuisine, food and beverages is kind of popular all around the world. Our democracy and institutions relating to it, and ancient heritage that people come to see and appreciate the Indian, what culture India has to offer. So all of these are different elements that have constituted India's traditional soft power. But here's the point, and here's something that we need to pause and ask ourselves, the set of questions. Next slide, please, Vivek. We are the seventh largest exporter of creative and cultural goods, according to the UNCTAD report. But what kinds of exports are these? Essentially commodities, and it is labor arbitrage. We do some embroidery work on garments that are essentially then sold under brands in Italy and France and Japan and the US. And we must increasingly recognize that countries are known increasingly by brands, by their products, and by the companies. If you do a spot poll of people around the world, when you think of countries, it's essentially the companies and the branding associated with different companies and products that they associate the country with. Yoga, for example, is an $80 billion global business. $80 billion. We've had a World Yoga Day in the very recent past at the UN, which is the June 21st. Yet we do not have a single Indian global yoga brand or product or company. We don't. In an $80 billion industry. Just imagine what that means. And it's something to really think about and really wonder, why haven't we created such an opportunity for our entrepreneurs? We are not, therefore, in the top 30 soft power rankings. This is a ranking brought out by the University of Southern California, along with the Portland Group. They bring this out annually. We do not rank in the top 30 in the world as far as soft power is concerned. So question to ask is, with all of these festivals of India and this art and cuisine and ahimsa and ancient culture and yoga and all the other stuff, what is the real economic and geopolitical leverage that we have been able to harness from our traditional soft power? What exactly has that been? Apart from some feel-good meetings and so on, what has been the economic advantage? What's been the geopolitical leverage we've been able to get? These are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. Where are our companies? Where are our brands? Where are our products around the world? Where do we see them? Right? And these are the kinds of issues that we need to really start engaging with if we are going to move the needle on this issue. Next slide, please, Vivek. So we have to shift the focus from commodities and labor to products and brands. From a supply side, which was a development sector kind of mindset, where we looked at capacity building, we've looked at training, we've looked at providing grant resources, all of that to the artisans, to the craftspeople, etc., to now also look at the demand side of the house. Who's the buyer? Who's the customer? What's the market? The design, the technology changes that are happening ever increasingly and at a faster pace each day. Understanding of customers, distribution, branding, intellectual property. There have been several cases where big brands like YSL, Yves Saint Laurent from France, have actually copied stuff done by our designers, our artisans, and used it on their material and garments around the world because we were not aware of it. We were ignorant of what it means, and we got exploited in the whole process. And it's a continuing saga because our entire approach has been that of what in software is called an open architecture. That is, we do not lay claim to any proprietary patents on yoga, for example, right? It's open to anybody to use as they see fit, create their own versions, create their own brands, create their own products and material, which are derivatives of yoga, and essentially get economic advantage out of it. So we have not been in the business of creating standards, creating institutions, or thinking about all of this in terms of markets. More on this as we make progress in this talk. Then the good news for us is that the trends are very supportive of the shift that we need to do. The trends, what are these big trends that are occurring within India and around the world? One of the big trends that are happening is the changing demographics, the millennials and the new breed of Indians that is emerging. Much more confident, I would say exceedingly confident, well engaged with the world, very familiar and comfortable with technology. There was a Google report last year that came out that said that the predominant trend that they have identified both across urban and rural and across ages and all of that and income groups, proud to be Desi, is the overwhelming theme that they have identified last year. We have a new breed of entrepreneurs now emerging. These are the young entrepreneurs who are very savvy about the way the world works, who understand entrepreneurship, who understand capital raising, who understand company building, who understand technology, all of those things. And it's that breed that is making the shift happen. And it is a market readiness that is supporting this. As India's incomes are rising, effect of media, globalization, travel, etc., more and more capital is becoming easily available to Indians, easily available to Indian entrepreneurs. And if you look at the trend line of venture capital, of private equity, of angel money, etc., those numbers have absolutely skyrocketed. And that's the good news. And if you look at, for example, the Zomato IPO that took place recently, it tells you that Indian technology, internet companies are coming of age. There's a market for it. People are understanding what these products, these kinds of companies are, and are willing to invest and bet on the future of such companies. And ease of doing business is becoming better day by day, with thanks to changing regulation and usage of technology and all of that. And the only industry that India is globally recognized, regarded, and known for has been Indian IT and technology entrepreneurship. So that offers a lot of models for us to learn from. There are abstractions that we can take from that. There are learnings that we can extract and apply to sectors like the cultural entrepreneurship and make those sort of learnings applicable to different sectors and parts of the economy that need it. And it's important that we need to start thinking in these terms. And that's something that I would encourage all of us to do. And clearly, there's a massive opportunity to be able to profitably build brand India through cultural entrepreneurship. Next slide, please. So there's also an opportunity today that's beyond the cultural. Indian software as Indian soft power. Like I said a short while ago, the only industry for which India is globally known and recognized and regarded is software, right? And it's a shame if we don't use it in the right way. So our digital platforms that we have created, an absolutely phenomenal achievement, which offers a brand new model to the world in the past 7 to 10 years that has taken shape in India. They offer a transformative blueprint that empower economies with Indian know-how and Indian know-what. And there are multiple countries at very, very senior levels who are wanting to engage with us to understand what we are doing, how we are doing, what is the conceptual framework within which we are operating, what is the policy framework within which we are operating, understand the technical intricacies and implementation and all of that. So the know-how and the know-what exist today in India that can empower economies around the world. And I can take examples and walk you through some of the things that are happening there. Next slide, please. So we talked about cultural entrepreneurship when I'm talking about India's digital platforms. So a little bit about what are these digital platforms. So if you think about our digital platforms, they're fundamentally built on these 5 layers. Right at the bottom, you have what we call the identity layer, which is Aadhaar, right? That is the identity layer. Then we have a paperless layer, which is DigiLocker. Aadhaar has over 1 billion, 1.2 billion approximately registrations done. DigiLocker has 75 million plus issuers, 4.5 billion documents. These are all paperless certified documents, whether it is your educational certificates, whether your job credentials, etc., all of those are now available through DigiLocker. IIM Ranchi recently became the first IIM to start having DigiLocker, through which it will offer its certificates. So if I have my certificate from IIM Ranchi at DigiLocker, I just give access to whichever institution or organization or individual who wants access to it. I give the permission, they log in, they access my credentials and say, yes, Sanjay is indeed from here. This is indeed his track record, etc. So I don't need to carry 20 copies of all kinds of documents all around the country, right? It saves time, it saves effort, it saves costs, etc. Then, of course, the very well-known third layer, which is the payments layer, right? We are all familiar with the phenomenal change and transformation that's occurred with payments. UPI has been absolutely transformative. And, the Bharat Bill Pay, the BBPS, then recently the PM announced the e-Rupee, which is a digital voucher. Just imagine how transformative a digital voucher can be. It is person specific, it is purpose specific. Now, whether it is for education, whether it is for health, whether it is for labor that's been done, it can have a massive transformative impact. And these are things that the rest of the world is still trying to figure out how to use, how to deploy at scale, and the bewildering complexity that India offers, both from an infrastructure standpoint, language standpoint, socioeconomic standpoint, etc., that India has been able to achieve all of this in spite of the challenges that it faces. The fourth layer is a transactions layer. On top of all of this, and the biggest example I can take is DIVOC, which is the digital infrastructure for vaccine open credentialing, right? The entire COVID infrastructure was created. The entire vaccine supply chain, the vaccine management, and the tracking of certificates, etc., has all happened thanks to this digital infrastructure that exists, which is the DIVOC infrastructure, which is absolutely phenomenal. In many established countries around the world, you still have to carry certificates issued by a doctor that's handwritten. There is no way to determine the authenticity of it. There is no way to make sure that you are indeed the person who has received the vaccination. There is no way to authenticate and to credibly determine if you have indeed been the recipient of vaccine A on so-and-so date, etc., right? Then, of course, all of you are experts. The direct benefits transfer, the DBT process, right, has also been absolutely phenomenal. The number of people who have been impacted by it, over 900 million people, 8.22 lakh crores, have been impacted across over 450 schemes and 56 ministries. It's absolutely humongous. It's phenomenal. Then there is a one nation, one ration card. Just imagine the impact it has on people. A laborer from Bihar lands up in Maharashtra to work and he can access the PDS system thanks to the one nation, one ration card, right? And that all of this is possible because of the underlying digital infrastructure, whether it is Aadhaar, whether it is DigiLocker, whether it is UPI payments, etc. The entire system has the building blocks today to make these things happen. Then we've got the National Digital Health Mission, which is another phenomenal thing under the National Health Authority of India. There have been, large numbers of people are being admitted to hospitals. There's a health insurance program. There's a new way of dealing with all of this, by upgrading the public health centers, etc. But how do you enable it? How do you credential healthcare providers? How do you credential diagnostic labs, pharmacies, right, pathological labs, etc., and doctors and hospitals? How do you know who's going where? What is their background? How good, how bad are they? How does the payment infrastructure work? Because insurance is a real problem in healthcare, primarily because of fraud, primarily because of the fact that and therefore the risks are very high for the insurers. So how do I make it easy and simple? How do I make it transportable across insurance payers and so on? All of this is now happening thanks to this National Digital Health Mission, where an entirely new infrastructure is being created. Then we have the government e-marketplaces, where you can buy products and list yourself, etc., on government procurement. Then there is an ONDC, which is an open network for digital commerce. How do the MSMEs and the local retailers deal with the Amazons and the Flipkarts and big tech? What is the infrastructure, the public infrastructure available for them to leverage, right? So that is one big thing happening. The other piece I would like to talk about is about lending. Right? Lending is a phenomenal opportunity today. And, and we'll talk about that, particularly whether it is a small business lending, whether it's person-to-person lending, all of it can get enabled thanks to this technology infrastructure that's about almost entirely in place today. Regulation needs to come in very quickly, and mindsets of people and training and deployment has to happen. And then finally, we have the citizen layer. The citizen layer is about giving consent. The privacy of a citizen has to be maintained, and the citizen has to be able to give permission. And therefore, there has to be a pathway to ensure that the private information of the citizen is protected from the transaction itself. So there is a technology framework that exists today, and that is being deployed by some banks in a sandboxed environment to make sure that this happens. So these are some of the examples that exist. For example, your FASTag e-toll on the highways is another example, or your Vahan vehicle registration system is another example. So these are all multiple areas in which India has created this phenomenal digital platforms. Next slide, please. So the platforms of India, typically in India, what happens is only when we get recognized overseas do we wake up in India and say, yes, we've done a good job. So we've received enormous pats on our back from the likes of Bill Gates and Raul Paul and Professor Kenneth Rogoff, Vasantdhar at NYU, etc. Multiple media outlets have talked about what India has done. And Google in 2019 wrote to the Federal Reserve, the US Federal Reserve, saying that the India example is something that they would recommend the US Federal Reserve to follow, and said that they're contemplating a system called FedNow, that the FedNow should be an open system akin to UPI, is what they have recommended to the US Federal Reserve. The Bank of International Settlements has a paper that came out in December 2019 talking about digital financial infrastructure lessons from India. So these are all some small examples of the acknowledgement of the work that's happened in India. Next slide, please. So therefore, digital governance for the world, India offers a brand new model. Very quickly, there are 4 models today around the world with regard to governance, and particularly in the era of digital platforms and big technology. These are raging debates all around the world, issues about sovereignty, issues about security, issues about privacy, digital trade, commerce, etc., etc. There is a big conversations taking place in multiple regional groupings. But there are essentially 4 models today. One model is the China model, which is a firewalled model where everything is controlled by the state. All the data, everything is within that state. Nobody else can actually interact with it without the explicit permission of that state, right? So everything is firewalled, everything is within China. So they will decide what is to be done by whom and how. We've seen the recent crackdowns that they have unleashed on all the entrepreneurs and tech companies and so on. So that's one model. The second model is the American model, which is private sector led, but kind of backed by US State Department, US aid, and folks like that. And essentially to push American, products and services and ideas and all of that through the digital platforms and their products, and this is a well-known model in America. The third model is the European model, which is entirely based on legal and regulatory regime. So they have enacted something called the GDPR. They've got a law that talks about protecting the rights of EU citizens vis-a-vis Americans, vis-a-vis others. So they're adopting a legal approach to deal with all of this, because they realize that as far as technology is concerned, there are the American companies, and they are unable to deal with the onslaught of the Chinese. So they have adopted a legal framework to deal with all of this. Now, what is the Indian approach? And if you see the fundamental Indian approach, I'll come back to this. And you have seen that, at the G20 in 2019 have talked about the importance of dealing with emerging technologies, data, et cetera. And the UN SDG has also talked about a legal identity for everybody. With the 200 plus countries around the world, most of humanity does not have a legal identity. Okay. And that's the unfortunate reality. Africa, for example, Latin America, Central Asia, parts of Asia, Southeast Asia, etc., do not have it. So the United Nations High-Level Panel on Digital Cooperation, the ID4D, Identity for Development, Identity for Africa, Smart Africa, multiple such programs have all talked about the same thing. The need for having an identity, need for having a stack or a set of platforms that deliver livelihoods, that deliver identity-based societal goods to citizens of multiple countries, right? And that is something that is being propagated. And that is where the Indian model has so much of purchase, has so much to offer. So the Indian model is the fourth model. What is the Indian model? That it is a digital platform as a digital public good. Next slide, please. So digital platforms as public goods, right? On top of which, so we have public goods. On top of these public goods, you have private sector innovation. You have the private sector operating. They create packaged services, packaged offerings to different market segments and niches. Just like you take UPI. UPI is the underlying public good. Then you have a Google Pay or you have a Phone Pay, which is the private sector, that sits on top of a UPI infrastructure to make things happen. Think of it in another way. The government creates roadways and highways and expressway as public goods. You have the private sector that makes the vehicles that runs on it, right? In a similar vein, think of Indian digital platforms as public goods. And, Bloomberg in October 2018 talked about how India could transform Africa. Then, we have this wonderful tweet from the chairperson of the African Union Commission, saying that African can learn from India to create an Africa-conceived and owned system that ensures inclusive, harmonized growth for our continent. Because continents like Africa and several countries in Latin America, etc., do not want to become digital colonies, do not want to become dependent on the technology of the West. They want to remain agnostic. They want to remain independent of the vendor as well as of a technology. India offers that today. That as a benign power with a lot of open architecture thinking around it, right? And offering all of these as public goods, it becomes a very, very powerful way to essentially gain credence in the foreign policy area. Next slide, please. So we are very, very well placed, right? So this is obvious. So, we're superbly placed actually around the world. Indian software is recognized everywhere. If in countries in Africa, whether it's Rwanda, whether it's Morocco, whether it is, Egypt or Kenya, etc., a lot of their people are trained in India, in Indian colleges and all of it. There's an Indian diaspora there. Indian software is recognized everywhere from Silicon Valley to Japan to Singapore, right? Indian software is at global scale. They have a massive talent base, huge domestic capacity. And software platforms and software are high value added products. And they are environmentally friendly. So there is nothing that, really can be a detriment for actually propagating this, right? And there's no real exploitation of, let's say, the labor and, things of that kind. Next, please. So obviously, the benefits to India are obvious, right? India becomes a technology knowledge partner, which it never has actually in its entire existence. That other countries come to India to source technology. Right. And that becomes a very, very powerful way to push the Indian economic geopolitical agenda. There are economic benefits, obviously, for the Indian companies and others being participative. And there is a cognitive capital that gets created through digital governance, Indian know-how, Indian know-what, all of that. Next. other countries too gain, because now they have access to proven technology at scale. It is owned by, it's a public good, so it's owned by government and public entities. It's again not owned by any one company or any one vendor. And citizens benefit, whether it's financial inclusion, it's social benefits, it's credit, it's access to records, health, etc., etc. There's a massive advantage that is offered. Next. All of this is great, but how do we do it? Right? It's one thing to speak conceptually. It's another thing to actually make it happen. So we'll take some examples, and I'll also lay out a framework. This is a framework that has been discussed at different fora with different departments and ministries over the last 5 years. Next slide, please. So first of all, obviously, there needs to be strategic intent. That is the higher order aspiration for India. Why should we do this? What are our higher order goals? It has to be, therefore, then translate into a national mission. If you think about all the seminal changes that have taken place in India, they've all happened when we have adopted them as a national mission, which means it is across ministries, it is across departments, right? And is fully empowered leadership. These are the prerequisites. Otherwise, it tends to become very silo-based, very department or ministry-oriented. And because a lot of these national scales, as well as foreign policy things, nowadays will require the coming together of very many different arms of government in different ministries. So therefore, a strategic intent. Thereafter, we have a national mission objective for both cultural entrepreneurship and digital platforms. Now, take the word cultural entrepreneurship. There are at least 9 ministries that have their own definitions of what is cultural and what is a MSME in the cultural space. So we need a common definition. Exactly like in 2016, just 5 years ago, for the first time in Government of India lexicon, the word startup became a part of the lexicon. Until then, startup was not recognized or was unheard of in the Indian government lexicon. What that has done to the new age entrepreneurs, to technology, to availability of capital, to finding listings on the stock market, to creating value and innovation has been simply phenomenal. So that is what that startup policy actually has done. Now we can say, when we talk of Silicon Valley, we talk of Japan or Israel, etc., people understand what startup is. The word startup has permeated across many departments and ministries within the government. We need to have a similar thing for cultural entrepreneurship. Ease of doing business has to dramatically change. Dramatically. I mean, the number of laws, the number of regulations, the number of compliances that small businesses have to deal with is simply mind-boggling. And technology can play a big role in reducing the friction and the cost and the time and the scalability of all of these. The focus has to be on income and wealth creation, and therefore involve the private sector, have an ecosystem approach to make all of this happen. And a classic example is the Global Thai Restaurant Company. This is how Thailand used culinary diplomacy to build a massive franchise for Thai food. Thai cuisine is today known all around the world. It's available all around the world. There are over 15,000 Thai restaurants outside Thailand. And this has happened because of the coming together of multiple ministries by the Small and Medium Development Bank of Thailand, the Exim Bank of Thailand, by giving loans to people. They gave credit to Thai nationals who wanted to set up restaurants outside Thailand. They got loans of up to $3 million each to be able to set up this kind of restaurants. Chefs were trained. Thai condiments, Thai ingredients were sent out to all these restaurants around the world. And there was a massive training program, awareness program, and multiple departments and ministries participated. So what happened? As a result of this whole thing, the export of Thai spices to all these countries zoomed. Chefs in Western countries became very familiar with Thai cooking and styles of cooking, the recipes and the ingredients. So that again led also to the rise of exports. Each of these restaurants, they created a multiple tiered model. They had There were also centers that showcased Thai culture and artifacts and the products. So therefore, what happened was tourism into Thailand took off. Right? It's a wonderful case study worth looking at, the Global Thai Restaurant Company, how it happened. And all of it because it coming together of entrepreneurs, the government, multiple departments, ministries with a very clear, focused, outcome-based approach, not outlay. In India, we look at outlay. We rarely focus on outcomes. And that's one important change again that we need to keep in mind. Coming to digital platforms, advocacy in international forums, right? We've talked about all of this, but very rarely have we as Indian leadership gone on international forums, thumped the table and talked about the success of our digital platforms. So we have to drive up awareness within our country. There has to be greater engagement and deployment models. Our agreements today don't talk about our digital platforms, don't talk about software. All the time it appears as if we are doing dairy farming, we are doing metals, we are doing minerals, we are doing all the old commodity stuff. When we are the world's leader today in software, I've gone through several agreements that the government of India has signed with several countries. We don't talk about software at all. We're only talking about, regular commodity products, whether it's leather, it's metalwork, it's dairy and, things of that nature. Partnerships, obviously, we need to do. Now, we have a program at the Ministry of External Affairs called ITEC, which is Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation, right? And this is a 50-year-old program. Now, why can't bureaucrats and others and other officials from other countries get trained at the Indian government expense? Why can't they all be trained on digital governance, on digital platforms? We had even created a course content and modules that we could offer to the institutes that host these visiting officials as part of ITEC to make them aware of what happens. So when they go back, they become ambassadors of the Indian digital platforms. If you go to Rwanda, for example, several people in Rwanda have been educated in India, but we don't have a means or a method or a plan to engage with them and to educate them so that our soft power comes through our software. Right? We can set up digital financial inclusion centers of excellence in Africa, for example. There is no reason why that cannot happen. But we don't think that way. We don't think markets. We don't think standards. We don't think institutions. Example I'll give you again is MOSIP. Just like the example of the Global Thai Restaurant Company in cultural entrepreneurship, digital platforms are an example of MOSIP. Designed, developed, built in Bangalore for the world. It's an open source identity platform, sort of like Aadhaar, right? Morocco has adopted it. Philippines have adopted it. Sri Lanka has signed. Togo has signed. Ethiopia, multiple countries. But somehow we do not have, and this whole effort has been sponsored, funded by philanthropic institutions like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, by Omidyar Network, by NORAD from Norway, the Norwegian aid agency, and only Tata Trust from India. Because somehow within government, in the private sector, we just don't think that way. Now imagine how powerful this is when their entire country's identity platform is built on stuff that is built by India. Our IT companies can be part of it, to deploy it, to train their people and to run their systems, right? I mean, the opportunity and the possibilities are phenomenal, but we don't think that way. And that is one of the things that I'm proposing, that we sort of rethink, recalibrate how we look at foreign policy, institutions, standards, and markets. Next slide, please. And everything flows from our strategic intent. So you are what your deep driving desire is. As is your desire, so is your will. As is your will, so is your action. As is your action, so is your destiny. Right? If we do not have the deep driving desire, our strategic intent to transform the way this country thinks of itself and its role in the world, of using its enormous assets, both cultural as well as from the world of knowledge and technology, I'm afraid our destiny will not be in consonance with what our aspirations are. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very interesting. So let me Well, I think, yeah, given your floor, I think it was very interesting and very well connected. So let me ask a few questions which perhaps didn't fit, in the line of talk, which are of interest to us also. Some of them, I guess, directly related, some indirectly. Uh, so first is the question of regulatory systems and frameworks. Right? Would you have any thoughts on that? Of course, you've given the different models, and there is an Indian model, and the part about the double layer. We've recently written this paper on India Vision, and basically pointed to two things. One, which you emphasize and put very, very well, the layer, the public goods layer, which India has created. But you also need a good professional independent regulatory system, for example, for the privacy issues, other issues which will arise, whichever is in, etc.
Yes.
So if you have any thoughts on the regulatory part of it, that would be helpful, or comparisons or
Yes.
examples from somewhere.
One
I'll
of
just put down.
Sorry.
Oh,
sorry.
you're going to go one by one? Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Is that okay with you? Okay.
Yeah, I have 3 points, but okay. Yeah.
Okay. Because one of the places, because, like I said, Europe has adopted a regulatory legal approach to determining how the EU would operate, given the incidence of big tech impact on citizens, impact on sovereignty, etc., etc. So the GDPR, our right now in Parliament, we have the data privacy bill that is yet to be passed. We also have another bill, which is the non-personal data bill. So we have two bills. The personal data bill has made a lot more progress than the non-personal data bill. It is important for us to learn from the Europeans on this, and learn not just from the data protection angle, but understand how they view markets. Right? They've got something called for example, the UK has a Digital Markets Commission. Now, what if now we do not have such, we don't have any such provision in our entire system at this point. We do not have anyone within government who's like a chief technology officer or chief information officer. Who is the data, for example, is there a chief data officer who takes care of how this data that gets generated, both personal and non-personal data, from the billions of transactions that occur every day, both at the state government levels and at the central government levels, right? So when we create these institutions, we have to have a regulatory framework, almost like what SEBI did. Now, SEBI came about in the 1990s as a result of all the chaos that was going on in the stock markets at that time. So an independent regulatory body which has got teeth, which is run by experts, which has got policy people, has got legal people, has got technology people, right? And a clear law that backs it. If you take NPCI, if you take UIDAI, right? Now, NPCI has been created partly by RBI and partly by a host of other banks. Now you take UIDAI, right? Now, initially there was no real law that was backing Aadhaar. Subsequently, the law came. So the point I'm making now is our strategic intent must be, look, we need to create the framework, whether it is legal, whether it is policy based, whether it is technology, and all the derivatives thereof, and therefore create independent institutions that drive this. Dr. Virmani, you're on mute. I can't hear you.
So that is how we did SEBI also, because
yes, exactly.
To have well-functioning financial markets which are free and competitive,
yes,
one has to have a regulator. And so
yes,
this was not didn't happen by itself. We thought about it in
exactly,
the finance ministry and
exactly,
created it.
Yes.
But of course it evolved.
Yes.
The initial one is always a lot of bureaucratic and other interests, but
yes,
more professional, more economic context.
yes,
Anyway.
yes.
So, but 2 points. You mentioned the European GDPR,
yes,
right?
yes.
Is that by and large a decent model for us to?
Yes. In fact, our personal data model is based in large part on GDPR. In fact, if you look at America, since it's a very federal, it's a federal polity in the US,
Right.
California has a California Consumer Protection Bill.
Okay.
I think it's the only state that has it. And that is also modeled on GDPR.
Okay. Okay. That's good. Yeah, that's what I wasn't sure about. So that's useful. Yeah. So,
Yes.
California Consumer Protection Act. Is that what?
Yeah, I think yes. I think that's what it's
Something
called.
like that. Okay.
CCPA. Yes.
Right. Okay. Okay. That's good. Right. So the rest of it you answered. Okay. The next, there are two more questions. One is on, actually, they are both general. One is more connected, which is, in Atmanirbhar Bharat, one of the things which has been emphasized is marketing, right? Connecting every district in the country, picking a product and then trying to connect that digitally and otherwise to the regional market, national market, international market. So
Yes.
that is one area. And just let me put the third also on the table so you can just respond. And the second is this, I have an impression that there's an imbalance between the demand for Indian tech skills, etc., is rising much faster than the supply. So something if you can say, enlighten us on that issue.
Sure. So the first observation you had was about the linking of the markets, that is from regional or district level to at state level or regional level, national or maybe even international. Now, it is the easy part of all of this is in providing the hard infrastructure, which is all the telecom lines, which is the computers, which is the storage capacity and all that, which is the physical hard infrastructure. The softer infrastructure, which is the processes, which is the awareness, which is the training and skilling, right? Which is the marketing, meaning how should I package this product? How should I brand it? How should I sell it? All of that. That is the relatively harder challenge to resolve. If you see what is happening today, companies like Amazon, right, which is a Goliath. Amazon has a platform which is available around the world. They have a program called Amazon Karigar, which is for the artisans and craftspeople, right? A few million craftspeople and artisans are part of the Amazon Karigar program. Now, the question we should be asking is, why haven't we done it? Similarly, Flipkart, which is basically a Walmart company. Then there is an Aditya Birla Group company called Jaipur. So they have a platform for weavers and artisans, people working in the area of handloom and so on. So there are multiple given India's size, a micro market is also pretty massive in global terms, with number of consumers, number of producers, etc., etc. Now, all we have to do, we have the horsepower, we have the capacity, we have the capability. And states have to take the lead here. It is not just a central government issue, because all these arts and crafts and stuff relating to commerce is very largely local or regional. So states have to take the lead. However, and this is a very unfortunate reality, is that the capacity of the state, and when I say state, I mean the Indian states, not really the government, of a average Indian state is rather low when it comes to digital awareness, technology adoption, and therefore the capacity and capability resident within to create the appropriate frameworks that ensure that such a policy can indeed be framed and thereafter administered effectively, right? And it's a function of the evolving nature of our polity itself because of the various other challenges. The second question you had, can you please repeat that? One was, of course, on markets.
So that is more general in terms of the skills.
The mismatch between supply and demand.
Yeah. How to do something about it, or what other things need to be done.
Yes. The good news, like I said, is this is a area that has evolved over the last 30 years in India. That is getting people trained on IT, and it's almost become a templatized method. For example, large companies, let's say like a TCS, they come to a college or when they come for campus hiring, they essentially will say, we will recruit all the students in this college. And they have a system that filters people, trains people, evaluates people, right? And gets them to a point where each lot or each set of individuals becomes good in a particular area of technology. It could be some basic programming, it could be in analytics, whatever, right? So they have that ability. And this has been honed over decades of experience, and they have actual expertise in making it happen, right? Now, is there a way by which the state government or the central government can work with some of these large corporations and say, look, you guys go through hundreds of thousands or actually millions of resumes every year to recruit 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 people. Is there a way you can create a platform that enables several more people to come in from the hinterland in local languages that they can learn? We use the benefits of remote learning. Thanks today, we are seeing what the benefit of all of that with all the, thanks to COVID, right? Use all of those and create a army of people who are digitally literate and savvy and can get deployed in quick time. Sort of almost like a territorial army type of a setup, right? Where I don't have to become a top-notch technology architect, but I understand enough to be able to contribute and earn a living, right? So that kind of a model can be easily done, or the building blocks exist.
Okay. Yes, that's very useful. Kind of a PPP partnership.
Exactly.
Scaling up what is already exists.
Absolutely. So that is fundamental, Dr. Virmani.
The companies which are doing it for their own.
Absolutely. So we have to create a framework for PPP. There is no question about it.
Okay, that's very useful. Okay, Charan, do you have a question or one of your other colleagues have before we open up? Can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was on mute. I think we should open it up because we have had very good interaction already, and it is already 6:24.
You're right.
By
I also have to go
6:35, we would like to close. So it's open for discussion.
Okay, so can you pick up? Let's see.
Anybody who would like to ask a
anybody has a
question, please?
question, they can put it in the chat box, I guess.
Yes, there is a question in the chat box from Professor Subramanian, who's asking, Professor, do you want to ask your question yourself?
Go ahead, Professor, if you, Mute, unmute.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Very good evening to all of you. And then this is a very comprehensive lecture on the digital platform, very exciting one. And you have correctly put it, the PPP model will be a greater thing at the macro level. And you are talking about a national or state level in the platform infrastructure to be created so that there will benefit from all participants who come on the infrastructure platform. But then there are two issues. One is cost at a macro level, whether there will be a cost reduction for introducing these infrastructures to the economy or the consumer trade. Or number two, from the micro level, what will be the benefit for the small participants who will come and sit on those platforms and engage themselves, whether there will be an increase in cost or reduction in cost, and then what will be the difficulties which you face. I just propose whether there could be a specialized university education for this handling of these infrastructure, regulatory matters. I am from Reserve Bank. I have been handling payment settlement systems in India from 1986-87. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much. So 3 questions. Let me respond to them in order. First is, what would be at a macro level, what will be the cost implications of setting up a digital infrastructure of all kinds? The second question was relating to how does the smaller participant benefit and how do they get to take the advantage of these platforms? And the third question was, is there a need for a specialized university or some mechanism to sort of propagate all of this? Coming to the first question, I will take the example of Aadhaar. Now, of Aadhaar. Aadhaar, is clearly the largest such program that has taken place in the country, where 1.03 billion people have all received a Aadhaar number. Now, how did this happen? What was the mechanism adopted to make Aadhaar happen? It was a PPP model. The private sector was motivated to join the UIDAI to do all the enrollments of individuals across the country, which is a mammoth task. And that is where the real cost lies, right? I mean, the cost one has to pay is in accessing, millions and millions of people, getting their data into a system, verifying it, and then issuing a number that cannot get duplicated, right? That's basically the process. India was able to do this entire exercise at about a little over $1 per enrollment. How? Because it didn't pay any of these private parties anything upfront. They were only paid for each enrollment that they did. So they were motivated to therefore do as many enrollments as they could. The back-end system was so designed, it took care of the errors, it took care of the duplications only, and then it laid down the processes, laid down the standards. So all of that was part of the system design. Now you needed people to actually go out into the field and actually implement it. Then that typically in any project, about 30% is the design cost. 70% is actually implementation. That is taking something to market and making sure people adopt it, enroll it, and use it on a regular basis. And that they did with the PPP model. Okay, so that is the one sort of quick response to your question. Second is how do, and just as by way of comparison, like I said, it's a little over $1 per enrollment, okay? Little over $1 per enrollment. The UK had a program called Verity back in the 1990s, with a similar ID program they launched in the UK. That program got junked because it was designed from the ministry angle, not from a citizen angle. And it cost the UK government £60 per enrollment. So now in the recent past, when I say recent past, I'm talking last 5 to 7 years, the British government and their chief technology officer has visited India multiple times to understand Aadhaar. And this is what I mean by digital platforms as a vehicle for our diplomacy. Right? They have come and understood. We have not gone and taken over. You see the difference? And that's the important mindset shift that I keep talking about. The third thing you talked about was about, the small guys, how will they participate? The small guys today actually stand to gain enormously by being part of global supply chains and global networks. If they are not part of global supply chains and global networks, they are going to get marginalized. Therefore, what has the government decided to do? On one side, they have created something called the ONDC, Open Network Digital Commerce, to enable them to compete with the likes of Amazon and Flipkart and all of that. Okay, so Nandan Nilekani is actually part of the advisory committee to the government of India on the ONDC. Okay, and there's also a similar thing called OCEN, Open Credit Enablement Network, which is going to make available micro loans to a merchant over a mobile phone in a matter of minutes. Okay, and that's called OCEN. So these are all phenomenal building blocks that exist and need regulatory frameworks within which to operate. So the small guys have enormous amount to gain. by being participants in this new emerging digital platform based economy. The third thing you talked about was, why not a specialized university, right? Now, my thinking is, yes, we can certainly have a specialized university, which is kind of like the mothership, which is the storehouse of all the intellectual knowledge and capability. In addition to that, what we need is courseware and pedagogy and case studies that are made available to all institutes, all academic research organizations, all business schools, our diplomacy arms, etc., so that they all become familiar and learn about all of these things. Everybody does not have to become a scholar, but everybody needs to be aware that such a thing exists, that such things are possible. And these are the general frameworks. I don't have to become a PhD in that area. That is only for the specialized few. Right? But for all the others, the awareness level itself is the first step. And that can be done by what is a distribution model, whereby I create all of this content, I create the pedagogy, I create the case studies, and I distribute it to all the other institutes and organizations so that they become aware and learn about it. For example, the IAS Training Academy in Mussoorie, right? Or the RBI offices, or the Administrative Staff College. Why can't they have modules on digital governance, right? There is the Sushma Swaraj Foreign Services Institute in Delhi. Why can't they have a module on digital governance, right? Why can't the IIMs have a module on digital governance? And so on. I mean, one can go down the entire list. The point I'm making is all of this has to be distributed, right? Because knowledge is not a monopoly.
Yeah, so actually, this is a good example. I think you said that you are not an economist, etc. But actually, this is a fundamental concept of public goods.
Yes.
Actually, that the government should provide the public goods, and the private sector should have the proper environment to compete and provide the services. So yes,
right.
but I want to just add, because I was deeply involved with the UID.
Yes.
We conceived the UID in the Planning Commission. We got all the ministries on board. We had a report, and at the end of that report, we actually did a experiment. We did a competitive bid for IT companies, and one of them got it to demonstrate how the enrollment process would take place. And then actually that whole thing was put in a report and recommendation, and then it got stuck in cabinet for, this was done in 2009. And then I submitted my report, not 2009, 6, and moved to the finance ministry. And then the darn thing was stuck in cabinet disputes till it was finally resolved and was hired to implement it. Yes. The only other thing I would say, actually, at that time, I was afraid that it would be opposed by all the leftists. So the report, we emphasized only the welfare aspects, actually. The use of the Aadhaar for cleaning up the whole governance system, actually.
Yes.
Because we were afraid that if we brought the private into it, the security issues, safety issues, and they would junk the whole thing. But I think Mr. Nilankani took that big step.
Yes.
And it was lucky that Mr. Modi picked up this and just kind of rammed it through the system. But, at that time in the, environment, we were living in UPA.
Yes.
Had a lot of leftist and communist support behind it.
Yes.
It would have been very difficult to push the private angle, but I'm very happy that it did. Okay, Charan, is there one or two other questions?
Yeah, there is a very good question by Major General Sudhakar.
Okay.
Can we take last question? I know it's already 6:36, but as the chair permits, can we take one more question? Major General Sudhakar, can you please be brief
Thank you, sir. I will be. Firstly, heartiest congratulations to Mr. Sanjay for a very stimulating talk, sir. And
you.
one of the best on the technology that I have heard so far. My question are twofold. Essentially, our country, as also region, has been seen in the past to have been surprised by many turn of events. From military security point of view, whether it is with regard to terrorism or what is happening in Afghanistan, we have not been able to carry out a predictive analysis of turn of events. Is there any scope or the relevance of this subject that you have covered? Can it be nuanced to find or formulate a strategy and apply the concept of the soft power, the digital India? One. Second, is there a case in point in the paradigm that you have covered, sir? Can it be applied to integrate the population in the areas which India claims that
Yeah.
they're part of the nation? These are the
Yeah.
two questions, if you can kindly
Sure.
reflect
Thank
on.
you. Thank you. So two quick points. Again, I must preface it by saying I'm hardly an expert on these topics. I mean, and I'm speaking to experts such as yourself. So please bear with me when I respond to your questions. See, national security has multiple dimensions, obviously, and therefore, from a technology standpoint, at least the technology that we have discussed today relates to a very important and specific aspect, namely cyber sovereignty and cyber security. I'm not talking of other national security matters. Okay. Now, it has got serious ramifications. For example, and I'll just take 2-3 examples, right? Today, when you have telecom networks in the border areas of our country, is the equipment there imported from someplace, or is it built by us, right? For example, and then there are issues about, let's say, big tech, the so-called Facebooks of the world, the Googles of the world, etc. They have enormous amount of proprietary information on each and every Indian citizen, each and every email, each what you visit, what you eat, what you see, what you discuss, everything is known. All right. The question is, how does one, therefore, deal with these kinds of platforms that exist around the world? And one way to think about it is through digital public platforms, that is owned, designed, owned, conceptualized, run, deployed by Indians for India by India, which is what is the exact same thing that China has done. You don't find Chinese equipment and Chinese software sitting in American strategic areas, whether it is defense, whether it is telecom, whether it is power grids, whether it is any strategic area of the country, right, which has massive impact on national security. The point again I'm making is that we have not thought about it in these terms till date. Okay, which is why we never invested in it. You take defense. Only now we are talking about converting ordnance factories into companies, into 14 companies. Only now we have started a program called IDEX, which is the Defense Ministry's outreach to technology startups in India to build innovative solutions that can be of use to the Indian Defense Forces, whether it's computer vision, whether it is artificial intelligence, etc. Right? So the point I'm making is, unless we think of this as a PPP type model in all areas, digital public platform, PPP model, we will never ever get innovation at scale for national interest. And I keep saying this all the time. It is time for us to think of designing our own playgrounds, designing the rules of the game. Others can come and play, but the rules are controlled by us. And one model is the Indian Premier League, the IPL. Okay, we're very, very popular. Indian cricket today controls world cricket. We have designed the IPL. We allow only we allow only 4 foreign players per team. The money is made by India, within India, for India. Indian players, Indian talent, Indian TV, everything profits, right? So it is that kind of a model that in my view will help. Regarding integration of people in remote areas or border areas with us, clearly, if people get the benefit of services and their ease of living, ease of doing business gets significantly enhanced, thanks to digital platforms, whether it's education, whether it is health, whether it is doing some business or commerce, whatever be the case, whether it is accessing rations, whatever the case may be, using these platforms makes people believe that the government is there for them. Public services are accessible by them at low cost, 24/7, right? These are all very important steps. And you can, because if somebody is far away and has not been spoken to for 5 years, that person becomes more susceptible to getting indoctrinated one way or the other, right? So these are all very important things to think about. And you raised a very powerful point.
Just a follow-up question in case it's slightly technical, but I often wondered, I mean, you would have more knowledge of it. Is, for security, because it's a big challenge, as you well know, all of us know, we have a country which think of us as an enemy, which is trying everything, it can to hurt us. So is there any way in which one can build a kind of a pipe into and out of India, which in some sense is easier to gatekeep and check, whether the enemy is doing something to everybody in India?
Yeah.
Is there any physical solution at all which is
No,
feasible?
well, there is no quote unquote physical solution. There is a technology based set of solutions. Okay?
No, but this question of piping everything in and out of the country through some kind of a digital pipe and then checking all the thing, is that kind of totally?
Yeah, well, what
while
happens
the thing-
is,
yeah.
So Dr. Virvani, what happens is today there are large numbers of submarine cables which
Yeah,
are in a
I
sense
know.
digital pipes. There are pipes that operate in space,
Right.
right? And so on. So there are many different, let's say, communication links of one kind or the other that operate. Now, where it matters is at the what is called the edge. That is at the point at which the pipe meets
Right.
the point of transaction. Okay, so a pipe comes in, let's say, from the US, terminates in Mumbai. From Mumbai, it breaks into, let's say, 1 million, distribution points, and each of those points goes and hits a separate, location. It is at those locations, which is called the edge, is where the surveillance and vigilance through technology takes place. Now, the thing is that most of this activity today is imported. We import it from the Israelis, from others. And, we have not built our capabilities in this area because, again, we have not worked with Indian private sector. The best brains today around the world are Indian scientists, Indian engineers who go and do it in the US and Europe and elsewhere, right? So we need to have that approach of working with the private sector to build all of these solutions. Otherwise, all the wisdom is not resident in any one entity.
So the reason why I asked that specific question is because everybody says actually there is no defense, it's offense. I'm talking more in
Yeah, I understand.
organized country hacking.
Yeah.
Not just ordinary
Yeah.
mafias and all.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand what you're saying. So,
Yeah,
so
but
typically,
so what my only thought as an amateur, I don't know the technical, is at the point where all these submarine cables
Yeah.
come in, is there some way, but what you're kind of saying is not really, I mean, it's not really.
no, it doesn't matter at that point because the volume of data is so massive, it's impossible for any entity to do it. Where you need to do it is at the point where it meets the engagement point. Meaning if the pipe comes out, and there at that
Right.
point you have to verify it because the quantum of data is less.
Okay, great. I think, Charan, that's the last question.
Yes, I think we should close now because
Yes, so let me thank you. That's very enjoyable, and we had a good chance to interact. That always makes it more interesting. So with that, thank you, and let me hand it to Charan to make some, he has to make some remarks.
Thank you
Yes,
very much,
sure.
Dr. Virmani, and thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
Sanjay, it was a pleasure having you, honestly. And your command over the subject is very impressive, and you could see that our audience, the question answers were very rich. We are thankful to you having taken all the question answers, though we have exceeded the time limit. Now, we will have the recording of today's presentation on our website by noon tomorrow. And I'm sure many of you, I'm sure Mr. Sanjay, you would also like to have that recording. We can
Sure.
play it in our classes. And as Mr. Sanjay was saying, we need to develop the acumen to think on these lines. So I think that recording will be very useful. I have a very important announcement to make. Afghanistan is really turning out to be an important global issue. And we are proud to say, as is the mission of our think tank, to discuss contemporary policy issues, we have Ambassador Vivek Kachchu speak to us on August 24, which is a Tuesday, from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Let me once again mention it. Afghanistan being a burning issue, we have invited, and we are fortunate that Ambassador Vivek Kachchu has accepted our request to speak to us on Tuesday, August 24, from 4 to 5 p.m. So we would invite you all to be around and take the benefit of this interaction. Our regular Friday webinar series will continue, and we have Brigadier Arun Sahgal, who will be speaking to us on Friday, 5:30 onwards, 5:30 p.m. onwards, which is our standard slot. And those will be on our website, and I will send the invite also. So requesting all of you to please join us for both of these on Tuesday for the ambassador, and on Friday, Brigadier Sahgal. With this, once again, let me thank each one of you, Mr. Sanjay, Dr. Virmani, and thanks to the professors who asked a question and Major General who asked a question, and making the discussion so lively and beautiful. Enjoy your weekend and see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much. I also must thank Vivek for running the slides.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.